Hello and welcome to another edition of the Speakers Academy. This one's going to be on logistics. We appreciate everybody that's joined us so far, but we thought, you know what, logistics is something that's going to be very important to what goes into actually doing a speaker's presentation. So once again, we have our esteemed panelists of Gary Kent, Joe Paiva, Todd Horton, and Dave Doyle. And we'll bounce around and ask these questions in no particular order because they've all been around the block a few times and they know how to go around with a lot of these logistics questions. So the first thing that really comes up in logistics of putting on a speaker's presentation is the planning, the arranging of the travel. And depending on the sophistication of the client that you're dealing with, it may be on you, it may be on them, it depends. So let's talk to Mr. Traveler himself, Gary Kent. And Gary, talk us through what a lot of times goes into the planning and the arranging of your travel when it's setting up for a seminar.
Yeah, Tim, and welcome everyone. Traveling is really about as critical as anything because if you can't get to the program, it ain't going to happen. You need to ask or be told by the sponsor, by the host, what their routine is. Some will pay for flights, but only if it's more than, if you're more than a certain distance away, a certain drive. There are times when it's on the border. What I will do, I always figure this is somebody else's money, and so I don't spend it recklessly. I will look at how much would it cost to rent a car, what's an estimate on the gas, that sort of thing. Maybe if for some reason I'm going to drive my car, I'll do the math for the mileage, which of course is now about 70 cents a mile. So it often makes more sense to rent if you're on that edge of that. When flying, one of the critical things that has paid off for me at least 3 times is looking at my layovers. If I can't get where I'm going directly, where's the layover going to happen? Because a layover is a recipe for something to go wrong and you will be stuck in that airport. So I always look, if I'm flying to Reno, my layover is maybe in Vegas. I look, if I'm not familiar with it, could I drive? If I get stuck on a layover, could I drive to the venue if I needed to? And that's happened to me 3 times where I drove, twice I actually literally drove all night to get to the venue, but that's an important thing, and it's not always going to work for you. But one of the other things that you can look at, if the layover isn't close enough, is look at the timing of the flights. One thing that I try not to do when I'm going to a venue is take the last flight of the day, because if something goes wrong with that flight, now I'm stuck, right? So I try to look and catch at least one earlier, if not a couple earlier flights, so that if something goes wrong, I'd have a shot at catching another one. So those are just some kind of initial thoughts. One of the other things is make sure, respect the host organization. I have known of speakers who decided, they wanted to book a first class seat. Well, most host organizations I know of are not interested in paying for first class. They may not pay for first class, or they may pay for first class and never have you back. So you need to think about the whole thing. And as I say, I think a critical point in my thinking is this isn't my money, right? I'm not going to waste somebody's money by, driving and charging them for extra mileage that I could have flown. I'm not charging them for a first class seat, all those types of things.
Oh, very good. I tell you what, Joe, I want to go to you next because sometimes there's been you're the international traveler at times. Any other things that you can offer to add to that in your experiences through all of this?
Sure. So, one of the things that I want to echo, Gary, is for gosh sakes, don't take the last flight, even if your session doesn't start till the afternoon of the next day. It's cutting it too close when you're coming a ways. So you definitely need to pay attention to that. And I really like this checking the layover situation. I have been in a situation where my initial flight was so delayed, I knew there was a good chance I would not make my connection. So even before I left my home airport, I called the rental company and made a reservation because they don't generally charge you for them. So I already had a reservation. In fact, one time there was so many people and we'd kind of become friends waiting for the weather to clear or whatever the reason was, that I rented a van and we all shared the cost of getting to wherever because we all needed to get there. Um, so that's something you need to do. And here's the thing, Gary already mentioned it. You may have to stay up all night to make a morning session. You don't get to do anything like even take a shower sometimes. That happened to me once. Most of the time, you can at least run into your hotel room, take a shower, change clothes. But for gosh sakes, don't look at the bed because that could be fatal. Um,
Yeah.
but there's a couple of other things I thought about. When you have to, this is to do with a different module, but when you think about the justification for the fees that you charge, keep in mind you're giving up an entire day often with all your planning, getting your packing done, driving to the airport, parking, this, that, and the other, that nobody's paying you for. You're not making any income during that day. And very often it may be slightly shorter going home, but it's pretty much another day. So, especially if you're flying, uh, you need to not feel bad about charging something that some people may call exorbitant before you start breaking it down for them. Um, Also, uh, on if you get an international flight or an international uh, assignment, I have done a couple of those, but I'll talk about one that's closer to home, and this is actually it's in America. It's American territory, but it was Puerto Rico. But it could be the Virgin Islands. It could be a lot of places where flights often don't follow one after the other to the destination you're going to. Uh, I don't think this is true of Puerto Rico, but certainly there have been flights where they were international flights and they don't occur every day. So if you miss one, how long are you going to wait? And are you going to try to argue with the airline to reassign the ticket to some other carrier? So when you're doing international, you definitely need to plan on more time. And if it's outside of Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, I would actually program in an extra day and an extra full day. And people, might say, "Oh, well, he's going to go hang out at the pool and drink a bunch of margaritas or whatever." But no, there's a very practical reason for this, and you need to be aware of it and be totally professional about being able to explain all this to your client.
Oh, exactly. Well, thank you, Joe. Todd, I want to go to you next, but I want to talk more specifically about typical travel by car. Let's talk about that perspective, because I know, and well, you and I both know the Midwest very, very well, especially when it gets from late October to 1st of March. Anything goes. How do you build into your schedule the possibilities of those delays? Say you're going to Grand Rapids or you're going to Madison or somewhere, and you've got a significant drive that's it's not enough to fly, but you're planning on driving it. How do you build in a little cushion for yourself just to make sure I get there?
Well, the key word is cushion. It helps to be a pragmatic pessimist. Think of how could things go wrong. Um, well, if you're a surveyor, you've learned a little bit about pragmatic pessimism anyway. Uh, for instance, just a couple months ago, I had to go from Indianapolis to Grand Rapids, and there was a winter storm coming through, so it turned a 4-hour drive into a 5-hour drive, but I was prepared for 6. The part of the cushion even involved choosing which vehicle I was going to drive, whether I was driving, a 2-wheel drive vehicle or a 4-wheel or all-wheel drive vehicle. And I have to confess, having the all-wheel drive was awful handy in those situations. So the logistical may affect the equipment you get yourself there in. The I generally don't like to arrive if I'm speaking the next day, whether that's morning or afternoon. I don't like to arrive much later than about 8 p.m. local time. Um, I have arrived later than that at times, and I had some rather memorable stories to go with that. Um, but generally, the break point for me, well, most of my stuff is here in the Midwest, so um, I'm fairly comfortable with saying if it's an 8-hour drive, I'm I'm willing to drive it because if I were to fly, if it's a choice between a flight and an 8-hour drive, the 8-hour drive gives me far more flexibility. Whereas the flight, is going to just, based on the things we've talked about, just the timing may eat up more than that 8 hours. So I guess to some extent, part of what we're talking about here is how much control are you willing to delegate to somebody else, and how much control are you willing to sacrifice for the weather. I had a choice about, years back somebody said, hey, how about Montana in February? And I said, no. Think about this. I ain't going to drive it, and it's far enough, and the location was such that, as Joe was saying, you don't have daily service into those airports. So, but generally, it's when we get to 8 hours I start thinking about alternatives. But relinquishing control involves elevating certain risks, and I think that's what we got to take into consideration.
Exactly. Well, good. Thank you. Dave, I want to finish this up with you, really just to kind of go back to the planning and arranging, and as far as letting somebody else help you handle it, whatever, or taking it on yourself. You've been around the country enough time to circle the earth a few times. I mean, how often is it are they taking care of it, or are you taking care of it and making it all work out?
Well, thanks, Tim. Yeah, typically when it comes at least to the travel part of it, I'll have a little conversation, whether it's on the phone or online, with whoever's in charge of the event. So in most cases, if it's a state conference, that's usually going to be the executive director of the association. And I make a couple of things, try to work out a couple of things. One, and Gary's talked about this, certainly Joe as well, especially when you're going cross country, and especially when a lot of the conferences are in that first part of the year. Increasingly, we all know issues with air travel can be problematic. Gary and I have a very specific example just a little over a year ago. And so I've taken to a point now where when I look at wherever I've been asked to speak, I'll look at what those logistics are kind of looking like. So I'll get online, I'll look at the various airlines if that's what it's going to be. and make what I believe is the best decision on which airline to go, which routes to go through. And if I feel like I need that extra day, I'm going to be touching base with that executive director and say, look, because of issues with weather conditions, canceled flights that are delayed, I'm coming in a day early, and I let them know right up front. And like Gary said, always mindful that it is not your money, it's their nickel, right? So I try to get the best rates I can. If I need a rental car at the other end, get that cheapie, whatever it is. If I don't need a rental car, that's even better. If I'm just going to be there, go in, go out, the heck with it. But yeah, my biggest issue now has been certainly going cross country during the wintertime, and that can be an issue. I've got one planned for next year. Like Todd was saying about Montana, they've asked me to speak. Well, fortunately, I'm speaking at Spokane for the Washington Association like 3 days before. So it's like, okay, we'll take 3 days to get to Billings. So we can easily build that in. But yeah, I've done a lot of communications with folks who are in charge of these, and I have yet to have any pushback from anybody when I say, look, I'm concerned about weather conditions, not making a flight, blah blah blah. And when I said I'm coming in a day early, everybody that I've talked to, has always been very gracious about it. Oh yeah, that's great, And the only thing I want to make sure of, in doing that is, okay, I'm going to have a hotel room. They take care of, generally speaking, they always take care of the hotel rooms, but you got to let them know, oh, it's going to be on these very specific days, if you want to have a room when you get there.
Because it sounds like to me, in the grand scheme of things, an extra day of hotel, whether you're paying for it or they're paying for it, it's cheap insurance.
It's cheap insurance. Yeah, it's absolutely cheap insurance. Yeah,
Oh,
and like Joe says, don't get there at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. When you've got to be on the next morning if you can possibly help it. And yeah, we've all been in those situations where we basically walked in the front door, and the session's beginning in a half an hour. We've all had those, and we don't like them, so we try to work our way around those as best we all can, I think. But they do happen. They do happen, and you have to be prepared.
Exactly. One last bit of on really setting all this up with the travels and all. And Joe, I want to go to you. What about documentation of your expenses? I mean, when you're negotiating with your client, what do you feel is kind of a best practice on documenting all your expenses, putting that together to be able to present to them for reimbursement, to making sure that everything that you're doing is getting taken care of?
Right. So I don't send them an invoice for my services and an invoice for my expenses, meaning two line items. That doesn't happen. Yes, one item for my services, and then I give them the line item breakdown, at least by daily totals. So this much on food, this much on tolls. Obviously, you might have an airfare or mileage at the front and back. And if you're flying, you might have mileage to the airport, and then you have parking and so forth. So you keep all those receipts. And what I do today, you probably know that many of these receipts I issued via email or text. So I immediately send it to my file on my computer and PDF it if I can while that's happening, if it's not already a PDF. And then there's all the miscellaneous expenses, $3.50 for a bottle of water at an airport would be cheap, but whatever it is, you keep track of all of those, and I just assign a particular pocket on myself, and at the end of the day, I immediately photograph all of them, and I have an app that then converts them to a PDF, so that I can build basically an Excel spreadsheet, or if you have invoicing software, invoicing software that lets you put those things in. Um, most people that I send invoices to don't always need to know or don't need to have uh, receipts for really small amounts. So I draw the line, and if I can, I'll ask them, "Do you want a receipt if it's under $10 or $20 or $30 and so forth?" And I haven't had to do this in a while because most hotels since the pandemic seem to have lost their bail people. But now and then I'd go in with a lot of equipment and had to tip somebody. And so that's usually cash, so you have to make yourself a note. And I usually put it in my most convenient app possible. Sometimes it's a note app, sometimes it's my calendar. It has varied over time. And then you just need to remember to pull it all together when it's time to send the invoice.
Very good. Very good. Gary, anything to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things came to mind. One is that I've been on enough flights, and I know some of the others have too. And if you ask a flight attendant, I have been on flights with people who were going to weddings who did not make the wedding. And you talk to a flight attendant, and they'll say, if you have to be somewhere, absolutely, you should go a day earlier, not the day prior, but 2 days prior. If you absolutely have to be somewhere, flight attendants will tell you that. So it just puts an exclamation mark on that. The other thing that I ran into one time, I was going out, Joe, to the Salina Seminar Series in middle of Kansas, and I had a flight, and it became patently obvious that my flight was going to be canceled because there had been quite a bit of snow, at least in my part of the world. And so I rented a car. I was at the airport. I canceled the flight out. I told them, I called whoever the rental car was across the airport, and I said I needed an SUV, and they got me one, and I got in, and there was about probably 6 inches of snow. I got out on the interstate, and I'm trying to find the button to turn the four-wheel drive on. I can't find it anywhere, so I stop in the first rest area, and I realize I have an SUV that's two-wheel drive. I would have been better off with a front-wheel drive car than a rear-wheel drive SUV, and I drove all the way to Kansas City at 40 miles an hour, which is about that's a pretty good drive at 75 miles an hour, but yeah, it was a long time. But I don't know that would happen today because I think, everything's all-wheel drive, and if you get an SUV, it is almost assuredly going to have either front or all-wheel drive. But it was just something that I always ask about nowadays. I didn't even think about it. So there's just a couple more travel tips.
Exactly. Very good. Todd, anything else to add in there, especially the documentation or anything want to throw in there?
Honestly, I don't have a lot to add there. I've gotten to the point where I don't charge for meals. I'm going to eat anyway. So I just, like Joe does, I just give them one invoice. It's got my fee, it's got my my mileage, and sometimes the client may say, I'll give you the option if there's printing that needs to be done, like if there's a participant handbook, like some of the technician training I do, I'll ask them, hey, do you want me to do it or do you want to do it? And most of the time they'll do it in-house, but occasionally, just because of timing, I'll invoice for that. Rather than doing multiple invoices, just do it all at once. So, that's how I approach it.
Keep it simple. All right. Well, when we talk about logistics, not just getting to and from and having a hotel room, whatever, it's also about the setup of the presentation you're about to give. And so tell us a little bit about, and Dave, I'm going to go back to you. Tell us a little bit about when you go into a room that they've got you scheduled for, and you're looking at how you're going to present, what are key things that you look for as far as screen setup, audience setup? What are some of the things that are good and bad for what type of presentation you want to give?
Sure. Well, first of all, wherever I go, again, hoping I get there, the night before, I always check out the room that I'm going to speak in the next day. I like just like to look at the layout, big room, small room, what do the logistics of that room look like? And then to go set up, and usually if it's a morning session, let's say it starts at 8, I'm down in that room by 7. I give myself at least an hour to set up everything. And most times, the overwhelming majority of times, 5 minutes and I'm done. The hookup works, everything's in good shape. I will always go to the back of the room. Right? I'll use my slide advancer to advance the slides, make sure everything is going the way it should, and then I take a good hard look at what my slides look like on their screen, so that if I am one of the most of the people sitting in the back, because we all know that's how most people do it, I like to make sure that whatever I have on the screen, they can see. And if they can't see, I make a mental note to myself. Okay, when you're talking about these things, make sure that you highlight, oh, for those of you sitting in the back, I know you can't see this directly. It's in your handout material, or it's in the material you can download from the conference site, but this is what it says. So I try to make that mental note so I know what it looks like. I always make sure also that I carry a baggie with me of different types of connectors. Now, by and large, that's not a huge issue much anymore. It used to be, but even still, like in this last couple of 3 months, I've run across at least 2 occasions where they had an older setup. And yeah, it wasn't just an HDMI, and you plug in and away you go. So I had to have something that they didn't have. So I got my little baggie and get out the right cable and hook it up, and away I go. So I always make sure, before I even leave the house, 2 or 3 days before I leave, make sure, oh yeah, the bag is there. Things like the little utilities that I'll use to advance the slides are almost always run by double or triple A batteries. I always make sure I've got a couple of spares that are in my bag, so that when they go bad, not if they go bad, when they go bad, that I'm not caught off guard. And I, like I said, I do my best to try and have all of my setup done within about 5 to 10 minutes, so that I feel comfortable. Now I can go get a cup of coffee, have a little breakfast or something, and I can feel a little comfortable when I walk in. Oh, I'm not gonna spend the next 20 minutes trying to get the screen to work. So.
Right. Exactly. Todd, I want to go to you next, because the variety of sessions and topics that you give, and I've got to believe that there's been some times that you've walked into a room where you're going to give a presentation, and it kind of caught you off guard, whether it's the size or the layout or whatever. How do you deal with really trying to adapt yourself to whatever possibilities that there might be with some challenges of a layout?
Well, I think the first thing that our participants need to understand is you don't have to settle for the way the room is set up. Okay. For instance, let's start with what some people would call the instructor station. Most venues are like a hotel. They're going to provide some kind of podium, and they may have hookups to that for your laptop and all that. I never use a podium. It feels like a prison to me. I walk around quite a bit. I know Dave does too, but I don't stand behind a podium. In fact, what I will often do is get rid of the podium, move it out of the way, and instead take like a 2 foot by 6 foot or 8 foot participant table, if there's tables, and I'll set up on that. And one of the reasons I do that, I think I've got it handy here somewhere. I have a digital tablet. I know this doesn't look good on video. Here it is. Sorry about that. I have a digital tablet that I connect to my laptop, and I can draw on this and draw on my slides or on other documents. Very handy, and to be honest, actually improves the engagement of the participants, because there's something about it when we are marking something up and watching each other do it, we engage in a little different level. So that requires some space. So I've got my laptop set up. I've got my digital tablet in front of it. In fact, sometimes the camera that's photographing me here, I can actually use it as a document camera, and I can write on a participant booklet with this camera pointing down at it. So I may have my tablet, my laptop, my document camera all set up there. So I need space. So first of all, as an instructor, you don't have to accept what they've provided. You can pretty much say, I need this. Because the focus is not on what makes you comfortable, but what makes the session beneficial for the participants. Second is, I've come into situations where maybe it's a venue where we're going to have 20 people, and it's in a conference room at a hotel, and you show up, you're setting up in one side of the room, and all the tables are 6 foot and 8 foot diameter circular tables. So a third of the people are going to have their back to you. That's really suboptimal. Really suboptimal. So there have been times where I've had to say, do you have other tables? Because, if you do, that would be far preferable to this. Let's set it up in rows. So in a lot of cases, especially the smaller venues and the hotels, they're making some assumptions, saying, oh, well, the last group we had, they loved this. Well, maybe that the last group didn't love it, and they never said anything about it. So it's really, really important that you, as Dave said, arrive early enough that there's time to get these things fixed. Yeah. Worst case, you use up that hour getting everything lined up, but best case, it's done in 5 minutes. The other thing to think about here is the shape of the room, and the orientation of the audience to the screen, the distance to the screen. For instance, as awkward as it is to have a really wide room that's shallow front to back, that's becoming less and less of a problem, where you've got venues that say, maybe there are 3 projection screens duplicating a presentation across the face of this room. Maybe the room is, there's some conferences here in the Midwest where, you might have 400 or 500, 600 people in a room, and that room is maybe, 120 feet front to back, but it's, 400 feet left to right. So you've got multiple screens. That's far preferable, in my opinion, to having one screen at the far end of a long, narrow room. If this is one of those things that I think is worth talking with the host early on in the planning phases, especially if you're talking about a large conference, saying, okay, how many people do you anticipate in the session? And tell me about the room you plan to have it in. How's it going to be set up? Because you may have an opportunity to influence that. So you can say, hey, what you're proposing could be done better. So I think that's worth doing. But as a presenter, you don't necessarily have to take what's given the opportunity and the proper planning and response time. Yes, you can change things.
Very good. No, that's some good tips, and because that's like so often you go, the variety of conferences and seminars I've even walked into to listen to. You just some of these places you don't know what you're going to get. Joe, I want to go to you next though on what happens when, and hopefully you've done this as part of your negotiation, but your session's going to be recorded, and depending on how they're going to do their video. Are you going to be trapped in Todd's prison at the podium, or is there somebody actually going to be on a camera that can follow you? I mean, how do you go about that thought process if you know something's going to be recorded for your session and then regurgitated for future consumption?
Well, like Todd, I don't like to be imprisoned behind a podium. So they better have told me ahead of time that they're going to record it, and they better have asked to put together some business arrangements about that. That's a topic for a different module. But if I know that they're going to videotape me, I'll say I'm not going to stand behind the podium. So make sure you have somebody with a regular camera on a tripod that can follow me around.
Mhm.
And if they choose not to do that, they do something which I think is very bad for the person attending on video, and that is to put it at an extreme wide angle to cover edge to edge, so to speak, of where I might be. But I can't take responsibility for that, and it has never come to this where they've said you need to stay chained to the podium. But I would definitely be saying a lot about that. But I want to go back to that other thing, which is to make sure that the videotaping isn't sprung on you. They better have told you ahead of time. If they haven't, you need to go running to the executive director and say, so what are you going to use this video for, and what's the financial arrangement we're going to set up for you to be able to use that recording?
Yeah.
Because you can insist that the camera be turned off if they don't wish to go into those details with you. Like I said, they should have done it sooner. If I can just add to the tail end of Todd's comments, this is another reason for showing up early, because I like to go look at the room the night before. Sometimes the room hasn't been set up or they're setting it up, and I've actually asked them to do things. For example, one of my favorite no-nos is to have a bright light shining on the screen.
Yeah.
And ceiling lights can sometimes be individually turned off.
Mhm.
So I asked the guys who are doing the setup, because they're much more familiar than the executive director or the executive director's assistant is going to be the next morning. How do I turn that thing off? And I find out where it is, not just ask them to turn it off, because you never know, by morning, some other boss will come by and say, oh, the lights are off, and turn that stupid light on. And I have actually had them take out a ladder in a few cases where the lighting was so obnoxious, and actually remove the bulb, because there's no way to switch that light off. So remove the bulb so that the screen can actually be seen clearly. And that's why, as Dave said, you put your presentation on and walk to the back of the room, and can everybody actually see it? And going along with that is that you have to use your judgment on this. Are these people you've worked with before, or are they not? Because I have shown up where there's no table, there's no place for me to plug in my projector easily, there's no place to put my laptop except on the floor, and it just goes on and on and on. So you need to have a very detailed list, like, I need a projector on a table, I need to have a cable that runs from my computer to the projector. You need to tell me what kind of input your projector takes. Now, this actually happened to me one time. It happened to be not a continuing education presentation. It happened to be on a military facility, but they only had DVI connectors on all their projectors. And we packed everything, but we didn't think anybody used DVI anymore. We even had VGA, but nope, So we had to wave our arms a lot and pretend that they could see the presentation on the screen. So you don't want those kinds of things to happen.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Um, well, we're getting down towards the end, and Joe, that's the perfect segue into dealing with AV problems and dealing with session problems that that really fall back to the logistics of what's going on within the session. So, Gary, I want to start with you on how have you handled problems in the past? I mean, what kind of a backup plan do you have for things? Because to me, it almost seems as important to have the ability to present your program without any AV for those cases when the power goes out and whatever. But the show must go on. So, how do you go about either preparing or just dealing with AV problems?
I think you're absolutely right, Tim. You have to think about what if everything goes out? This just happened to me a few weeks ago. I was presenting, and the power went out. Fortunately, I was in a room that had a lot of glass, and my computer was charged, so I didn't have a projector, but I still had my computer that I could reference. Some of my programs I don't need to. I could do a land title survey program, standing on one leg with my eyes closed. That's not a problem, but normally you need to reference your materials. So one thing one suggestion is make sure your computer's charged, because if the power goes out, at least you'll have that for some period of time. I have had projector bulbs go out in the program. Normally a venue will have those. A smaller hotel may not. It's not like you can carry one around with you, but just keep in mind if that goes out, what are you going to do? And Joe talked about waving your arms or whatever. The other thing is microphones. Right? I was just telling my wife yesterday I was at a program recently where the first speaker was about 5'4". The second speaker was about 6'4", and so the first speaker had the microphone down here, and the second speaker is up here, and didn't recognize to walk up and move the microphone up to their mouth. This kind of thing kind of makes me crazy that somebody is not aware enough to realize that. The other thing that happens is actually in the same session where the person had done that, they had a handheld mic and the battery went out, and they just kept talking. And I can't understand how somebody is not cognizant enough to realize, because when you talk in a microphone, you can hear it from the speakers in the background, and for them just to keep talking, how can they not be aware enough about that? So I have had microphones go out, and there's nobody there, and whatever happens, and so maybe I walk down a little closer to the audience. I'm going to start talking louder. You have to be able to adapt on these things. I did want to go back, Tim, very quickly on two things. One
Sure.
was Todd's comment about you don't have to take what you get. Do keep in mind that if this is especially a larger conference, but not necessarily, that rooms get set up for different things. And I have gone to some states and I'm like, what's the room setup going to be? And they're like, well, because of constraints, we're going to have to be in the room where we're going to be having lunch. All right, well, that means we're going to have rounds, and I cannot do anything about that. So as a speaker, invite people to turn their chair around or whatever, help people feel comfortable. So there's so many things to think about, but being prepared. Somebody mentioned I use an Apple, so I carry this around with me. In fact, I need to get another one because I have had these fail over lunch.
Oh,
right?
oh.
Worked when I went to lunch, Didn't work when I came back. That is a notorious thing that can happen with these adapters. So I really should be carrying 2 of them around. But getting there early, checking it the night before. Don't get upset if you get there the night before and the room is a complete disaster, because you can ask somebody.
Yep.
But there may have been a wedding there that night, and they're setting that, they haven't. Sometimes they're doing the setup at 11 o'clock at night.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a little disconcerting. I get there, as Dave said, an hour early, and the room is not even set up yet. Well, okay, that's a little disconcerting, but normally these people know what they're doing. It's routine for them. So you can ask some questions, but don't get into a panic mode immediately. Talk to your host.
Absolutely.
That's what you need to do, is talk to the host.
Very good. Dave, how about you? What about
Yeah,
some?
well,
You know,
I wanted to go
or-
back to something that Joe had talked about, being about setting up, making sure you know what's going on there. I've certainly found that if I'm talking increasingly, if I'm talking at a state conference or a large company or something, 9 times out of 10 they're generally pretty well prepared to do things. Where I often find that I have to be really thinking about, like Joe said, making sure they know what I need, is if I get asked to speak at a chapter meeting. And there'll be lots of times, whether it's up in Pennsylvania or over in West Virginia, and they'll say, "Hey, can you run up here and talk to us at a chapter meeting?" Sure, happy to do it, But you want me to do that? Okay, you got to have a projector. It's got to have this. Got to have a screen. All that setup. You got to have a table, exactly like Joe was saying. And a lot of times, those folks aren't prepared for that. So they might have to find 2 or 3 different people. Oh, somebody over here has the projector. Somebody else has a screen. And so you have to make sure days ahead of time that okay, that's all set up. It's there, so that when you walk in, you're not holding things up for half an hour or an hour while somebody runs over to an office and gets the projector or screen or whatever it is you need. So that's that, to me, that's always a big deal. I find other issues that I have to look at, and I thought about it after I finished my last one. In a fair number of at least my presentations, I'm oftentimes referring to something that's online, whether it's from the National Geodetic Survey or from some other site, maybe it's the NSPS site, I don't know, got lots of them. I make sure that when I get there in the morning, even though I might be there the night before and I've got the hotel or guest email or internet connection, that's working in the conference room. Because sometimes, oh no, you get the guest up in your room, but you don't get it down in the conference area. So you've got to find out what that code is, and you got to make sure that you're running around getting all those little bits and pieces together. And I hate to see those, where I'm anticipating to go and I want to show somebody a link that I've got, and I click on it and it goes nowhere. So doing that ahead of time is well worth that effort to make sure that all your pieces are set up and in place. So lots of tiny little things that you have to go through. And like I said, in most cases, it's a snap. It's not a big deal. But in occasionally, like Gary talked about the power going out. I had one just a year ago. I'm in the middle of a presentation, whole conference room, everything went dark. Well, I'm essentially doing it with finger puppets, and you just got to be prepared. It just happens.
That sounds like giving a presentation in Ghana last year. Power just goes out at the drop of a hat. But one thing I want to throw in here before I ask you the last thing, Todd, that last question, also Todd, something that I just had to deal with, and this is on a bigger scale of a conference, is having to go and bring your presentation to a master speakers room that then they spit out all the presentations to the various places, and then going to that room and making sure everything works. Unfortunately you're adding another bit of complexity in there that hopefully that they've saved it. And and my rule of thumb's always been, I'm saving my presentations in PowerPoint and PDF, so they've got them both, so they'll work with either. but then going to that room and making sure that it actually comes through the way you want to. That one's become a new one for me on some of these bigger conferences, being prepared. But Todd, any last thoughts on being prepared for any problems that come up when dealing with presentations?
Well, a couple things come to mind, and thanks for bringing up the master speakers room. These days, more and more, I'm finding that some of the clients I work with want not only a PDF of the handout, but they also want the PowerPoint slides in addition. Have no problem doing that. Sometimes the challenge becomes getting your file size down enough that it doesn't choke your own computer and clog the internet. But getting those upload links squared away in advance, that's not a day of travel preparation. Usually that's days or weeks in advance. But that's worth having good conversations. Usually going to have open conversations with your clients on, how do you need this? How do you want this? What's the simplest way for me to get this in your hands? I think it's also worthwhile to have multiple backups of your stuff. Don't just put it on the cloud and think I can get it that way. Put it on the cloud. Put it on your laptop. Put it on put it on a thumb drive. Get it tattooed on your left arm. I don't care. So just make sure you got multiple backups. It pays to be a pessimist. The other thing, and Dave mentioned this, I think Joe did as well, the whole idea of checking the visibility of your stuff in the back of the room. Really, this is going to relate to one of our other sessions, but when it comes to developing your slides, you really have to think seriously about how it comes across. I tend to look at this as a logistical thing because not only does it need to be visible at the back of the room, but it also needs to print well. Okay, so most venues, most hosts want to have some kind of handout. So if you're one of those that instead of developing a text outline, you say, "Hey, I'm gonna print the slides." That way, they've got the graphics. Well, that's great, but you put three slides on a sheet, which is the common outline view, or four, maybe two. Depending on your font size, that may not be readable at all. So if it's not readable in print, then it's not going to work in the venue. So I stay away from things like dark backgrounds unless it's a contrast where I've got black background, white text. That's an exception, not the rule for me. I'm typically going with white backgrounds and making sure I use good size fonts. And if the stuff on my slide is too small, if the text on my slide is too small, it's going to become 2 or 3 slides, so I can enlarge the font big enough to make it readable at the back of the room. So bottom line, what we're trying to do is ensure that the participants are getting the maximum benefit, and we want to make sure that nothing that we do gets in the way of their learning. I used to tell my students, please don't let education get in the way of learning, because it will if you don't keep it on a short leash. And presentation is only one part of the learning process. Presentation should not get in the way of learning. So I would encourage everybody to look at all these logistical considerations and realize there's a lot of this stuff you can get squared away long before you show up, and it makes everything go so much smoother.
You made a great point with that Todd, that, and we'll get into it a lot bit more when we're talking about developing the presentations. I mean, it's going to depend on, and that's part of the communications and logistics of this, whether or not you're presenting in a classroom or you're presenting in AT&T Stadium. So it's going to depend on a lot of those things, on what your participants, your attendees can see. What do you want them to take away from your slides? And I guess the other thing I would like to just a final interjection is to, and because I've been guilty of this myself at times, just make sure you're in the place to where you can give that presentation. Like I said, getting there late at night, first thing in the morning, that really is going to cloud how you're going to present that day. And if you're not on top of your game to know how to present, that can be a problem. So leave yourself enough time, like you've all said. So another great session, guys. This is, I think it's very important, very well spoken on how logistics plays into not just giving a good seminar. There's a lot of stuff that goes into all of this. So I think with that, we'll wrap it up for this session. Keep following us wherever you're looking at these sessions. We've got many more to come. If you haven't seen all of them yet, please feel free to jump in and take it all in. So with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks.